The first time I saw the girl, she was screaming. Not the usual cry of a child, but something deeper, rawer. A guttural sound that echoed off the walls of her father's old Victorian mansion. The air inside was heavy with the scent of burning sage and incense, but none of it could mask the suffocating presence of evil. Her name was Anna. Barely 15, she had once been a bright and lively girl. But now, she sat tied to an old wooden chair, her limbs thrashing against the ropes, her eyes rolling back into her head. Her father, a collector of rare artifacts, had unknowingly brought home an ancient relic that was a vessel for Asmodeus, the most terrifying demon of ancient times. The demon had attached itself to the girl, sensing the vulnerabilities in her heart. Several priests had come and gone, each more hopeful than the last, each more defeated. The last attempt had been Father Marcus, a seasoned exorcist with decades of experience. He entered the room with his head held high and his cross clutched tightly in his hand. He began his prayers with conviction, but Anna's face twisted into a cruel grin. Her voice, no longer her own, spoke in a language none of us could understand. The crucifix in Father Marcus's hand shattered into pieces, and before our eyes, he was lifted into the air and thrown against the wall, his neck snapping with a sickening crack. Despair settled over the house like a thick fog. Anna's father, distraught and desperate, locked himself in his study, flipping through ancient books and calling on every contact he knew. There was only one person left to call, someone who was said to deal with demons like no other, the Black Pope. His arrival was unlike anything I had ever seen. Clad in robes as dark as night, his face hidden behind a black hood, he moved with an eerie grace. His voice was calm, a stark contrast to the chaos around him. As he approached Anna, she snarled and spat, but he did not flinch. "You are not welcome here, Asmodeus," he said softly, but with an authority that made the hair on my arms stand on end. The room grew colder, the shadows seemed to lengthen, and for a moment, I could feel the weight of Asmodeus's anger pressing down on us all. The Black Pope began to chant in a language I couldn't comprehend, his words weaving through the air like a spell. Anna's screams grew louder, her body convulsing violently against the restraints. The walls seemed to close in as the Black Pope continued his exorcism. I watched in horror as dark tendrils of smoke began to seep from Anna's mouth, twisting and writhing like living things. They moved toward the Black Pope, encircling him like snakes. His chants grew louder, more intense, and for a moment, I thought he might succeed. But then, everything changed. The smoke seemed to retract, pulling back into Anna, who went limp in her chair. The Black Pope staggered, his breathing ragged. His hood fell back, revealing a face that was both young and old, his eyes filled with a deep, unfathomable sadness. Suddenly, he dropped to his knees, clutching his head in agony. A dark laugh filled the room, a laugh that was both Anna's and not. The Black Pope looked up, and I saw his eyes were now a deep, inky black. "Asmodeus," he gasped. The demon had not left. It had simply found a new host. Anna's father rushed forward, shouting, "No, this isn't how it's supposed to end." But the Black Pope raised a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "It's too late," he whispered. "He's inside me now. The only way to end this is to end me." There was a moment of silence as the words sank in. Anna's father fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "No, please, there must be another way." The Black Pope shook his head slowly. "This was the only way to save your daughter. I've made my peace with it." He stood up, turning to face me. "You have to do it," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Take the dagger from the altar. It's the only thing that can kill me now." My hands trembled as I reached for the dagger, a cold silver blade inscribed with ancient symbols. I could barely see through my tears as I approached him. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Don't be. This was my fate. It's time for it to end." With a deep breath, I plunged the dagger into his heart. His body stiffened for a moment, his eyes wide with shock, and then he collapsed to the floor. The room was silent, the air still, and for a brief moment, I thought it was over. But then, the lights flickered, and a cold breeze swept through the room. The shadows seemed to gather around the body of the Black Pope, swirling and coiling like a living thing. And then, slowly, his eyes opened. But they weren't his eyes anymore. They were still that deep, inky black, filled with malice and hatred. "You think this ends here?" Asmodeus's voice echoed through the room, a twisted smile spreading across the Black Pope's face. "This is only the beginning." I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. Anna's father screamed, his face pale with horror. The Black Pope's body began to rise, hovering above the floor, the shadows wrapping around him like a cloak. And then, with a deafening roar, he disappeared into the darkness, leaving us alone in the room, shivering with fear. The house was silent once more, but I knew it was only a matter of time before Asmodeus returned. And this time, there would be no one left to stop him.